We've all been guilty of this, throwing labels like narcissist and psychopath around when someone is difficult to deal with. The most important thing to remember is that they are not all serial killers like you see in the movies. Secondly, all of those terms are distinct labels that qualify as psychological disorders. Welcome to our channel, where we talk about the journey to self-development. If you're new here, we trust you're going to love this video. And if you're a subscriber, thank you for coming back. Without further ado, here we go. Today we'll be talking about a very common confusion most people face when dealing with a difficult or selfish person. Is this person a narcissist or a sociopath? How do we even know the difference between all these labels when they have too many overlapping features? We'll talk about how to tell the difference between a psychopath, a sociopath, and a narcissist when you are around one. Knowing this distinction is really important, so you're better equipped to deal with them. Later in the video, I'm going to show you how best you can handle relationships with psychopaths and the rest of them. Because yes, navigating these kinds of relationships always requires peculiar methods. So I've observed that the biggest cause of the confusion is that too many similarities exist between these terms. If you want to prevent yourself from using them interchangeably, you'll have to learn their differences. Beginning with narcissism, you'll find that narcissistic people primarily struggle in their interpersonal relationships because they tend to have this insatiable need for excessive praise and recognition. This affects their connection with others because, with some, much focus on their own self-worth and superiority. There's just no room to be able to see others, let alone connect meaningfully with them. Narcissists also end up exhibiting unusual behaviors in their attempt to re-establish control and win the admiration of others. And you know what happens when they fail at this? Feelings of isolation set in. And few people know this, but there are different kinds of narcissism. Two, actually. Covert narcissism and overt narcissism. The underlying motivation for both is the same, so the difference lies in the expression. While overt narcissists may be attention-seeking, covert narcissists tend to be shy while holding on to their arrogance. Overt narcissists also have a grandiose view of their achievements and can be extremely self-obsessive. People with covert narcissism have the aching need for admiration too, but alongside this are insecure and often in distress. Call this vulnerability, if you like, but the best way to understand covert narcissism is by picturing someone who has low self-esteem, is oversensitive to criticism, yet has a sense of superiority that may not be so obvious. The thing with narcissism is that it can be challenging to diagnose, because how do you reconcile these conflicting traits? For instance, being charming and yet obsessive with seeking attention, plus conditions like depression or anxiety may trigger some of these traits which are identical to narcissistic behaviors. Aside from these categories I've just talked about, there is a second classification, or types, if you like, of narcissists that I think you should be aware of. Some of you may have heard the classic vulnerable and malignant narcissists. The classic narcissists are the typical narcissists. The kinds you think of immediately, there's a mention of the word, braggarts, always fishing for compliments and feeling like they're entitled to special care. If you are that person, or know someone who automatically becomes bored when the discussion topic switches from them to someone else, then they're likely a good example of a classic narcissist. Malignant or toxic narcissists shine best in the areas of manipulation and exploitation. These types of narcissists are somewhat borderline sociopaths or psychopaths because they have a brand of vileness that sets them apart from the other two categories of narcissists. They relish deceit and aggression and may find enjoyment in the suffering of others. Fortunately, just about 1% of people are affected by this kind of narcissism, with most of them being young people. The vulnerable narcissists are the third class here. And although people in this category are mostly introverted, they still go around with an air of superiority around them. Vulnerable narcissists often have fragile egos and deep-seated insecurity, and manipulation isn't very far from them. It's the case of gaining admiration and pity by being suspicious generously. The main thing that sets narcissists apart is their ability to feel. They may think too highly of themselves, but can experience guilt or shame when their inconsiderate behavior is brought to their attention. It might be a short moment of remorse, but they still feel it, right? And some of them even attempt techniques to help improve their relationships. Narcissists generally do not set out to harm others or be violent. They simply lack the empathy to focus or care about others compassionately. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, please hit that subscribe button for more content about self-development and improving your life. It really helps our new channel, and your kindness will go a long way. Unlike narcissists, sociopaths engage in manipulative behavior and deceive others for their pleasure. They have zero regard for rules and just break them without concern for others. So while a narcissist may act out of compassion simply to feel good, it's a more calculated process with a sociopath. They find pleasure in being manipulative and often enjoy toying with others. Something else that makes the sociopath harder to read is that they can come off as quite charming. It's why it's easy to dismiss their behavior or not detect it for a long time. A common trait you might want to look out for in a sociopath is feigned emotions. A person that tends to act warm and friendly before perpetrating harm may be showing signs of sociopathy. Think of people you know who lie excessively simply to get what they want, constantly blame others for their actions, or try to manipulate by threatening suicide. Can sociopaths form connections? Yes, they can. However, these relationships are a lot more likely to end up a mess because of how much they disregard the needs and rights of the other person. And this right here is the major difference between a sociopath and a psychopath. You might miss it if you're not paying as much attention, but because psychopaths do not experience emotions like regular humans, they cannot build emotional connections with others. Whether it's love, intimacy, or attachment, psychopaths are entirely incapable of experiencing these emotions. Psychopaths exhibit violent behaviors more than two other groups, so you might expect them to automatically be serial killers, rapists, murderers, or mastermind criminals. But not all psychopaths are these things. However, these people are even more calculated than sociopaths and can easily commit these crimes. It doesn't even help that they lack empathy, control, or understanding of boundaries. Compared to sociopaths, psychopathy is often regarded as innate rather than learned. The easiest way to identify a psychopath is their lack of empathy or inability to feel guilty for wrongdoings. But you also want to look out for behaviors like excessive meanness. Yes, we all can be mean, but the degree of this trait in a psychopath is simply unfathomable because they often find causing pain entertaining. Keeping that in mind, you can easily tell that unlike narcissists, who can feel some degree of guilt for their misdoings, this feeling completely escapes a psychopath. A psychopath is not going to feel the tiniest remorse for hurting you, because they simply don't care. And since some narcissists lack empathy too, you might confuse them with sociopaths. But pay attention to this. Sociopaths are more interested in asserting control over others, while narcissists do all they do simply to be admired. Sociopaths approach harm with more intentionality, unlike narcissists who hurt people mostly because they are unaware of the needs and feelings of the other. I also talk about spotting psychopathy in children in my previous video, which you can check out in the description. So in there, there's all that talk about the antisocial and aggressive traits to look out for in teens and children. And it's a similar situation if you're dealing with narcissism or sociopathy in children. But the real challenge with narcissism in children is that it mostly goes undiagnosed until later in the child's life. Some people get their diagnosis when they're around 25, because the belief is that this is when a person's personality really solidifies. Before then, parents sometimes write off the unusual behaviors as ADHD, or just regular juvenile misdoings. And it's pretty much the same situation with sociopathy and psychopathy in kids. Children change behaviors too often as they grow and discover themselves, so a misdiagnosis would do so much harm. However, you should still act swiftly if you notice strange behaviors like unusual violence or antisocial behavior in your child. Talk to a professional, hear what they have to say, because you really don't want to build children who cannot grow into wholesome adults, able to relate with their environment and the world. Differentiating between psychopaths and sociopaths is even more tricky, since there are a lot of similarities between both, and they both fall under the antisocial personality disorder spectrum. Think of it this way: psychopathy is innate, while sociopathy is learned. A kid who lives in a dangerous neighborhood might learn to be a criminal to survive. They may understand their shortcomings and may not be very comfortable with it at first, but years and years of living lawlessly eventually get ingrained in them and become second nature. With psychopaths, it's an entirely different ballgame. Any type of connection a psychopath forms with someone else is entirely for exploitative purposes. Some research has simply come to the conclusion that psychopaths have a different brain function, and because the psychopath is great at maintaining emotional control, it can be really tough to detect criminal behavior in them. In my previous video on the topic, I also talk about the best psychopathy treatments being those that utilize diverse options, including psychotherapy and the development of behavioral skills. Cognitive and dialectal behavioral therapies are two kinds I find particularly interesting for treating personality disorders generally. Essentially, the professionals help their clients understand their symptoms and find healthier ways to handle the massive emotions. Experts also sometimes recommend medications that can lessen the symptoms, especially challenges with anxiety and depression. But in all, nothing beats combined treatments as regards calming certain impulses triggered by personality disorders. There are a lot more ways to help yourself or someone you care about who's struggling with their emotional health. I've found that support is really essential in transforming emotional health, so don't be afraid to offer or welcome it in your healing journey. Discussing all of these differences with you is really to help you recognize the patterns, whether in yourself or in someone else. Let's talk a bit about navigating relationships with narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths. You should know that these kinds of relationships can be highly unpleasant and even dangerous. It's best to end the relationship if you're suffering emotional or physical violence, no matter how difficult this may seem. And maybe it's not you. Maybe you've noticed some of these traits in a loved one's relationship. You may need to intervene, because remember how we talked about psychopaths and sociopaths being excessively manipulative. Moreover, abuse victims often find it too hard to share their problems, but you will be doing them so much good by, first of all, empathizing with the victim, then finding the best way to keep them far away from the abuser. It's also very unlikely for someone diagnosed with any of these disorders that think they need help. So if you suspect that someone has it, or maybe that you do, seeking therapy is a great place to begin. I hope you found this session eye-opening, and would love to hear what you think in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this, and if you find this information useful, check out this other video from our channel too. Until next time, we wish you a happy and healthy day.